everyone. Today we have our another new episodes, and you know that World Talent Economy Forums we are actually producing cybersecurity expert in Asia Pacific. In between few days, definitely we will start our operations in South Asia, and we know that there are many youth communities those who need skill oriented support, and World Talent Economy Forum and School of Talent Economy we are working for supporting the youth communities. And our speakers, Professor Rob Enderle, definitely will be the keynote speaker for this conference, and uh, we want to invite him in our academy. Yes, he is very busy. Based on his availability we will invite, but definitely from next week, we will start our operation in South Asia. So, Professor Rob Enderlich, I know that cybersecurity for discussing and dialogues is very difficult. But when we start our operations in South Asia, uh, example country like Bangladesh, you know that uh, in their banking system they have problem with cybersecurity. Also, there are many youth maybe they can solve this problem, and we need right kind of mentors and training program. And I see from your post that there are some course you are sharing in your uh, Facebook. So what is your advice? And second things, most important thing is that how we can develop uh, good technology, especially for solving the cybersecurity problem for South Asia.
Well, okay, so it's a broad question. To start off with any effort in security, whether we're talking about physical security or cybersecurity, you first have to start with estimate of the threat. What's the nature of the threats that are coming in? What are the causes? Are they people going after monetary returns? Is it foreign governments causing the problem? Is it kids with too much time on their hands? And probably some mix of the three of them. But that will dictate where you put your underlying efforts. For most, the initial steps really come and become focused on security awareness, making sure that people aren't just doing stupid things. The baseline training to let them know how people phish, how criminals and foreign entities get access to credentials through phishing attacks, and what to do if you're hit by one, who do you call? If you fall for one, again, what's the reporting structure? What's the methodology that an individual can use to get help? That's the kind of the first stage, basic education, and then some communication as to a path to remediation and help. And then from there you can begin to build infrastructure. If you're starting with security, you're probably going to end up buying technology as opposed to building it initially, because it takes quite a bit of effort to spin something up from scratch. So if you're looking at existing domestic security resources, and I don't know what they are in Bangladesh at the moment, there certainly needs to be an identification of who they are, what they can do, and how ethically how the firms are put together to make sure that they aren't ethically compromised. Often in an emerging economy, you can have quote unquote security firms that are less about protecting you and more about just generating cash to make sure that you aren't hit. And there needs to be a delineation between the two types of firms. But once you have a basic understanding of security and you brought on board people that are experts in it. I mean, there are people in industry that have spent their entire lives in security, and they can be acquired as consultants to help you make your decisions, and then make sure that the investments that are being made are focused on the security threats of today and tomorrow, not the security threats of yesteryear. I mean, to give you an idea, the current generation of security technology is very AI focused, and rather than looking at specific kinds of exploits, looks at specific kinds of behavior. So if somebody is successfully phished and their credentials are accessed, the system is aware of that immediately, and it speeds up the response time and reduces dramatically the amount of damage an attacker can do. But that technology takes a lot to develop. The leading providers right now, in my mind, are Deep Instinct out of Israel and Cylance out of Canada. They're a subsidiary of BlackBerry. They're the two that provide perhaps the most advanced AI-based behavioral-focused security offerings. But their software, and of course, software only goes so far. You also need to integrate your physical and electronic security methods so that you can protect against things like disgruntled employees or employees that are in collusion or misacting, which is not uncommon in both developing and developed countries. I mean, we just had a big problem with regard to an ex-employee of Qualcomm cheating the company out of large amounts of money by fabricating an acquisition of, interestingly enough, Qualcomm's technology that Qualcomm then turned around and bought again. It was an amazing case, but it showcased a clear breach of security in terms of the information leaving the company, and then poor due diligence when the technology came back in. So intellectual property theft remains a thing, and Qualcomm just demonstrated the cost of that, both in terms of embarrassment and in terms of costly loss. Once you've got that, you've established your baseline of knowledge, you've trained your people, you brought on board the software. Now you're kind of at a level field where you can move forward against broader threats and better secure your environment. But that's kind of how you'd start.
Mhm. Excellent. Professor Rob, one thing you always discuss about quality. You always say that we need to improve quality, and definitely this is very important. So when the students do research, especially for cybersecurity field, uh, uh, definitely they are mature level student, they are from undergraduate or PhD program. How they can produce quality research, especially in this technological field, and they can
Well,
produce more good quality papers and everything. Yeah.
Well, probably the best place to start is looking for internships at security firms. That's where you're going to get the baseline of understanding of what's out there. You'll learn what resources are available to do the research. An awful lot of the security research is done behind closed doors and in relatively secure environments, so that the research information isn't then turned around and used by attackers. So if you're doing security research, it's best to do it in conjunction with somebody that's been doing it for a while. And the best first steps, if you don't already have an ecosystem that's capable of doing that, is to get an internship inside a security company or partner with a security company to set up a localized security expertise, a security competency area, so that you can begin developing the competence in country that becomes your seed corn for developing a security industry, or at least a security capability in country.
Mhm. Excellent. So let's say, yes, North America has a lot of quality organization, many big organizations in North America, especially Fortune Global 500, many big companies. So how actually from these organizations, the South Asian countries, they can get some sort of benefit, or they can collaborate, or they can make a proper bridging and make things successful.
Well, so the security companies want inroads into countries. So they need people with feet on the ground in country to help them sell their wares. That provides an opportunity for partnership with the firms in exchange for training and spinning up localized industries, because there's a deployment, a rather substantial service and deployment aspect to security technology. So in exchange for helping the country spin up that capability, and the country then provides the security company with an inroad to sales in country, and that creates the synergy that you need to drive the effort. It never works real well where one side or the other unusually benefits. And so finding that balance to provide the security firm the income they want and survive and provide the region with the training and capability they need, that becomes the way to do it.
Excellent. Professor Rob, we are thinking that how we can improve the academic cultures. Still, these academic systems, even in many discussions, we find that academic culture is not good. Lot of uh, things happening, and which is not actually helpful for the developing new generations. You are definitely a good example of quality professional
Thank you.
for our students, for our next generations. So in that situations, that how we can improve the quality of educations, and second things, how we can uh, like improve the overall uh, educational process to integrate it with the industry, because we are producing human resources for industry, but most of the cases industry complaining that we are not getting right kind of people. So what is your advice?
Well, the way to solve that is much closer partnerships between industry and education. And the goal, the initial goal, has to be to set up metrics. How do you measure what it is you're doing against what it is the industry wants you to do? And once you develop the metrics, then you have a way to measure what works and what doesn't, and then invest in the things that are providing a positive benefit. In other words, where the metrics are improving, then that practice is working. If the metrics are degrading, then that practice isn't working, and then you have a model for kind of a circular improvement as time goes on. The big problem with industry and education, in most cases, the two things are distinct and separate, and that there's no really integration. And even when you pull people in from industry, after a decade of being in education, they're out of date in industry. They're now basically teaching things that may have been true when they were in industry 10 or so years ago, but are no longer true today. And even so, a lot of educators have never really worked in industry, and so they've got theories about how things should work or may work, but they have no knowledge of how they do work. And that means that kids come out with very little understanding of what it is they need to do to maintain a career and advance. In fact, one of the things that education should focus on that it doesn't is how do you build a career? What is it you like doing, and where are the areas that you could enhance to make yourself happier with the job you're going to end up with? Because we're not all the same, and a lot of people come out figuring they're going to have the same job their parents had, and they don't really enjoy it, or they've seen somebody on television, they want to be a fighter pilot or something along those lines, and they have no concept of what the job is. And then they find out once they're in the job they don't like it at all, or they don't have the skills to do it well, and they're kind of screwed. And by that time they've wasted all this time and education and effort, and now they're locked into a career path they absolutely hate. I mean, I'm reminded of the number of people that I've known that just had relatively menial jobs that had really happy family lives, that they were very content in their lives, and met a number of people that were multimillionaires that were absolutely miserable, and at the end, and they died lonely and alone, and that makes no sense to me. So being able to train, providing some level of training to the kids so that they can manage their lives better, I think goes a long way to being able to create a balance between education and industry, but integrating industry into education and providing metrics, quality metrics that reflect the quality of the students that are coming in. So they're the people that are able to hit the ground running when they start on the first day, as opposed to typically having to take 1.5 to 2 years to really understand, once they've graduated, how to actually do the job. I'm pretty amazed at some career paths that you'd think would be obvious, like law. And the common response from people coming out with law degrees is they have no idea how to practice law. They've learned how to read laws. They understand what laws are, but they don't understand how to litigate. And a good chunk of being a lawyer is litigation. And if you don't understand litigation, you're kind of screwed. And then if you come out with contract law, good chunk of contract law is negotiation. Well, and they don't know how to negotiate. So you end up with people coming out with law degrees that have to basically intern themselves for a long period of time, be associates for a number of years before they can really practice laws. Their education isn't over. It's actually just beginning when they get the job, which seems kind of crazy. You really should be able to come out of school and be able to hit the ground running, as opposed to having to really learn how to work after you come out of school. The medical area is probably an example of how that's done better, where a good deal of medical training is done in hospital on purpose. So as they're learning, they're working in a hospital and being doctors or nurses. And so when they finally come out with their certificate or degree, they're ready to practice medicine. But we just don't have enough mentorship. We don't have enough interns. We don't have enough integration between industry and education to assure the people coming out of education meet the requirements of industry.
Excellent. I think our audience also responding as for your discussions, and very important things you bring, I'm actually from academy. Last 14 years of my time I spent in academy, and you are 100% correct. There are a lot of things which must need to be changed, especially the developing nations must need to be changed. And definitely I'm also ready to join in business corporation. I love to know what they want, and from there I can transfer to my students. And yes, we need a team. Definitely we need your help. So when we discussing about corporate academy cannot fulfill these kind of things, especially example, we need a lot of cybersecurity expert.
Right.
But I do research in Asia Pacific, especially in Malaysia and this kind of country. I do not find many university actually offering cybersecurity courses, degrees, training programs. They are not offering. That is the truth. So what do you think historically, where is the lackings? Is it the problem of the beginning of the story when actually academy grow or this industry grow? They have huge difference and gap, and still they do not fulfilling these things. We are starting dialogue, we are discussing these things, but what we are discussing, it's not practicals. What is the problem? Is it the mindset problem or is it a system problem?
Well, I think it comes down to how education is funded. If you're funded based on the number of students, then you're motivated to provide courses that the students want to take. And if the students aren't trained to pick courses that will lead them to fruitful careers, beneficial careers, then they're going to pick courses that are easy, that are that might interest them, but really have no benefit in terms of long-term careers, because that wasn't where the focus was. The focus was to attract students to the schools and give them things they wanted to do, not give things that they needed to know. And so the funding sources tend to be focused on making the students happy as opposed to making the students productive and effective. I think part of that is if industry funded this effort, because the industry, for instance, companies like Cisco have their own universities. IBM does as well. And the people that come out of those universities tend to come out able to do the jobs that they were trained to do. In other words, the focus of those education efforts are to give these people meaningful jobs, and there's a clear line between what it is they're learning, which is very job focused, and what it is they're going to end up doing. But that's not the way it is with general education. General education is kind of focused on not getting people into great jobs. It's focused on getting as many students, high-paying students as you can get, and that means you've got a hard disconnect between what industry needs and what the schools are providing, because the two entities are dealing with two very different customer requirements. And until you integrate those customer requirements, you're not going to be able to fix that problem. Or until you start penalizing schools for turning out students that can't get jobs, you're going to have that problem. At some point, you need to connect the schools hard to a quality work product that is connected to careers and lucrative jobs and jobs where you can earn a decent wage.
Mhm, mhm. Excellent. One thing I love to learn, even personally, I love to learn from you. Like, what is the impact of publishing good papers in corporations? Yeah.
Okay. My personal view with regard to publishing papers in corporations, we call them white papers, and I've published a lot,
Yeah.
is that
Yeah. I know.
nobody that you want to read them reads them. The only people that read these damn papers are the ones where where the papers either piss them off or tell them what it is, that tell them they're already brilliant. And there's way too many of the latter, where papers are just written to tell executives that they were already brilliant and they were correct. And that's why so many companies make really horrible decisions, and they'll point to some analyst or external analyst or internal analyst and say, "See, they said it was going to work. It's not my fault. I wasn't stupid." But the fact of the matter is whoever was writing the report was only trying to make the executive happy, and that is no way to do reports. But the reality is papers to a large extent are outside of training papers. The ones that are read are papers that talk about how to do something, and those are read. But if we're talking about white papers with regard to policies and the product and some of the rest, too many of those are written with the idea of making whoever the recipient is happy, as opposed to accomplishing what it is they're supposed to accomplish. And as a result, they've been largely corrupted. And the end result is the people that need to be reading them really don't, and the people that do read them, they probably shouldn't be reading them either.
Mhm.
So publishing papers inside of companies, it's not great, and often it can get you into trouble. If the what you'll find, and I did this a lot myself. I was in competitive analysis and I was internal audit, but and both generate quite a few reports. In both jobs, I had an unusual number of people trying to find me new careers, hopefully outside of the company I was in, as the result of holding an ethical line. And while I survived all of that, in fact, in one company they said we can't really promote you because too many people are pissed at you, but we can't fire you because you're too valuable. And that's really not a great position to be in. I mean, it's kind of, yeah, you did the job and you did what you were supposed to do, but at the end, it doesn't really help your career and advancement. So I'm not convinced that the paper writing, particularly critical paper writing, is a great career path. It's something the companies need, but you're going to pay a personal price for doing the work. And while there are people like me that will do that, will make those sacrifices, I don't believe any employee should have to choose between doing what's right and doing what benefits the career. The two things should be in line. If you do what's right, it should benefit your career. And if you find yourself in a job or doing what's right doesn't benefit your career, my advice is to get the hell out of that job.
Mhm. Excellent. Professor Rob, I'm sure from today's discussions, our audience really happy, learning a lot. Let's say you get a chance to develop a startup,
Yeah,
because we
I've
have
done
a
a
lot
couple.
of startup.
I've done what, 3 or 4 startups so far. But
Oh,
yes.
excellent, excellent. So you get a chance to develop a startup, maybe young
Yeah.
team working under your supervisions in South Asia for cybersecurity. Uh, how you want to develop this startup? What is the strategy? Because you are based in strategy from the day one, a startup
Well,
should implement.
first off, I probably wouldn't do a startup in cybersecurity. Because particularly in an area that didn't have a lot of competence, because you're going to have to import a lot of the skills, and because you're not going to have it domestically, and then the difficulty you're going to have is getting people to listen to the expert that you brought on board, because they're not domestic. So you've got a series of things that are going to make this really difficult. If I was motivated to try to do this successfully, I would first go in and see where the greatest critical need was. I'd make that my initial target. So whether it be healthcare or government or defense or pharmaceuticals or whatever, those are all areas that have a high interest in cybersecurity. but I picked whichever one had the highest interest and the best funding for my effort. And then I would go in and I'd start my meeting with them and finding out, okay, what is it you need, and see if as an independent I could build up and meet that need. Ideally, I'd probably look at hiring at least one person out of one of the largest companies that had the need, so I'd have insider knowledge into at least that one firm, and might be able to get my first sale to that firm that would establish me as a viable entity, and then move on from there. But it would have to be very focused at start, so I could husband my resources, and then it would be a matter of finding that first big customer and then developing the product against that customer, and then expanding out from that customer once I was successful. But it would need to be a very targeted, a very focused effort, and undoubtedly require me to bring on board resources from outside country initially, so I'd have a critical mass of capabilities to get myself off the ground. That's how I wouldn't do it, but if I was going to do it, that's how I'd approach the problem.
Excellent. Professor Rob, you always give a lot of good example from IBM, from Cisco. They have their own university. They are producing, even personally, I learn a lot from IBM and Google and Cisco, and these are the things. So what do you think, that our present academic system will die soon because of this kind of giant corporations coming and they're providing
it's self-support. I mean, the education has grants. It's funded by government. It's hard to kill something that it continues to be funded by almost unlimited funds. The issue really is if education isn't serving a purpose, it's crippling your industry. And if it's crippling your industry, that means it's crippling your tax revenues. It's creating problems with imbalance of trade. So bad education has long-term implications for the country, and so it's more likely the government and the country is going to fail if you've got bad education, and the educational institute will fail. Of course, if one fails, the other one will undoubtedly follow. But the leads are become so corrupt that it's no good at all. So here's a case where it is critical that both education and government understand that they have a symbiotic nature between them, and that it is important for government to assure that education is doing its job, and if it doesn't, the government is at risk.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That is very interesting idea. So when we actually thinking about new education system, fulfilling the corporate demands, what do you think about online education? Actually, World Talent Economy Forum, our decisions from now, because we do a lot of offline works and we face a lot of challenges, and we want to make 100% online. That's people like you, they can join easily in our classrooms and take some initiative and share your experience, or those who joining as a speakers, they can join. So how we can fulfill the corporate demand? We are very small, but we are eager to solve these unemployment issues.
Initially, if I were doing this, I'd first take a look at the jobs that are being unfilled, where corporates have a critical need and they're willing to pay whatever it takes to get warm bodies, and often having to bring in people from out of country because they can't find them in. That would be those jobs would be on my short list of things to explore. But I'd also project out 5 and 10 years, because it takes time for people to go through an education system, and you want to provide the people for the jobs of tomorrow when tomorrow comes. Providing people for the jobs of today in 5 years, probably not as good. I mean, it's better than complete mismatch, but it's risky, because who knows what the situation is going to be in 5 years. So coming up with your best estimate of what the jobs will be at the end of whatever course of study there is a good way to try to target your efforts to make sure that the people that you're developing will have the skills they'll need to be in the industry when the industry needs those people. Also, of course, it depends on whether you're talking about a 2, 4, 8 year program. Each of those would have requirements that would suggest that you need to have people available for the jobs that will exist in 2, 4, and 8 years. So the same thing. I think the school has to have a solid effort to estimate what the future job needs are going to be, and to make sure that they're training people, they're incenting students to develop those skills that they will need when that future time comes to pass.
Excellent. So very interesting. So what do you think about the future corporate culture? Is more because of COVID and everything, it will be more like uh, remote. Yes, we are discussing about hybrid mode, but there are many talents in around the world. So World Talent Economy Forum trying to connect all of the talented through World Talent Economy Forum. Um, what will be the future of workforce, even the cybersecurity industries? Yeah.
Well, those are two different questions. In terms of the workforce, it's really going to depend on right now the world's trying to pivot back to in-person learning. It's trying, but every time it tries, we've got an issue with regard to something that crops up and keeps the industry from trying to pivot back. Initially, it was the pandemic. Now it's that there are so many openings that employees can dictate where it is they work, and that most of them would apparently prefer to work from home. That's going to change. The economic conditions often change where you go from, too many jobs to too many workers. And as soon as we go to too many workers, then industry can dictate where you work again. At least if nothing changes, they're going to force people to go back into the office. And companies like Apple are already doing that. So the long-term trend still remains back to in-person until unless we can do this remote stuff long enough that it officially becomes the standard and in-person becomes the exception. And right now that's not the case. Now with regard to online learning, the effort with online learning and the reason why it's not working very well, except in efforts like Land School, where it is working, is because it really isn't using the full tool set that's available to a stream. So if you go in and look at like we are right now, we're just video conferencing. It's if you find me really entertaining, then perhaps I'm holding you. But if I was able to use multimedia examples, if I was able to switch it up and include videos, if I was able to make it more interesting, it's much more likely I'd be able to hold your attention and you'd stay with me throughout the entire session, as opposed to just a talking head, which can get pretty old after a while. And particularly if you're doing it back to back, or you're doing an entire school course and you're just getting talking head after talking head and no engagement, nothing very entertaining, and nothing that's really using the multimedia power of the platform, then I'm just afraid the students aren't going to retain much. In most cases, they might be playing video game on one screen and just having the lecture going on the other, and maybe magically they capture a couple of things, but they're not going to retain it. So you really have to find a way to use the technology to hold the eyeballs on the screen, and the entertainment and the content itself needs to be entertaining. It needs to be something that keeps the students coming back to the content and keeps them out of email or out of any of the number of things that can distract them. Otherwise, you're stuck with going back and doing it in person where you can control the environment. But even in person, they've been having trouble holding attention. Folks have smartphones, they have their laptops. I've seen plenty of times where you look into a classroom from the opposite side of the teacher and the kids aren't doing anything but course material. They're playing games, they're emailing each other, they're texting. They've got a lot of distractions in classrooms. So I'm not convinced that going back in the classroom is going to solve this. We need to increase the engagement value of our content, make it more entertaining, and use the resources that are available for multimedia streaming to make the streams more interesting, more exciting, and more vibrant. So we hold the attention span. And we also need to help force people into making their content more succinct. A lot of the folks that lecture will kind of throw everything they've got at the screen, and it just becomes one long litany of words, and the audience just doesn't. They're just going to drift off. So the lecturer themselves need to step up their game and be more succinct. I'd include myself as I get out of practice, but become more succinct. and more focused, and that helps keep people engaged and tied to the screen, and certainly more interactive. So, for instance, right now we've got questions coming in on the side, but because our content flow is different than the questions, I haven't been able to really respond to them. So, I want to take a moment and do some of that stuff, just real quick. The question with regard to folks in law enforcement, that's correct. One of the big problems we've got, our law enforcement agencies can't operate very well internationally. A lot of the cyber threats are coming from Eastern Europe and Asia, and from specific countries in Eastern Europe and Asia. And until and unless you can make it unprofitable for those entities to attack other countries, we probably won't be able to really get to the heart of the underlying problem. So a much stronger international law enforcement effort would make a huge difference here. I mean, the fact that Russia treats cyber criminals much like they treat weapons manufacturers, which means it's legal. Whatever they're doing is legal as long as they're not attacking Russia resources. They're perfectly capable of developing and militarizing malware and then selling it to whoever wants to buy it, as long as that malware is used to attack people that are outside of Russia. That kind of behavior needs to be stopped, but the only way you can stop it is through diplomacy. Right now, the law enforcement organizations just aren't capable of operating at that level, and that means the threats, especially the state level threats, which this really constitutes, is far greater than it should be.
Excellent. One thing I have in mind, I just want to share that what I understand from my 14 years of journey in academy as an academician, students actually learn quickly if they do projects, any practical projects. So actually, whatever you delivers, whatever the course content, whatever you give, the better way, give them a task, they finish the job, finish the projects, and they apply it, and they can remember it a long time. I think this is one of the major lackings in present academy. Uh, they do not give them enough projects. So let's say
and the projects they give them may be based on what industry might have been doing 20 or 30 years ago. So you find yourself. I mean, I really struggled that when I was in college. I would get something, and I mean, why would I even do this? I mean, it just wouldn't make any sense. I mean, it'd be great if I was farming in the 1800s, but it made no sense for how you might solve a problem today. So yeah, I think the project focused education for those courses that justify project focus makes sense. I know when I was younger, the most I learned was I spent a summer with a tutor who basically took me to various industries, companies, prisons, law enforcement areas, and just kind of showed me this is how people live. This is what happens if you break the law. This is how this particular business operates. This is what's important. And I learned probably more in that summer than I learned in 3 years at college. Because everything I learned was applied knowledge. It showcased how things were actually done, not how things were theoretically done. I mean, another example, one of the worst and best professors I had was a guy that was fighting being fired. And so what made him the worst is his tests tended to be a section out of the textbook, and we had to remember the exact sentence that he pulled out of the textbook. It had nothing to do with the material. But he was pissed off, and he was saying on the students. On the other hand, he'd worked for NASA, and he would tell us stories of what went on in NASA that I use today in terms of how to not to do things and assure quality. So some of the best quality education I got. So real disconnect between what he was supposed to be teaching and what I actually learned. But the end result is because it was practical knowledge. It was knowledge that he'd acquired by doing a job, and an interesting one at NASA. It was something that was very applicable to me, and it has been applicable throughout the rest of my life. So one of the most beneficial instructors that I had, despite himself.
Excellent. Mark Lee, thank you for joining today's sessions. We are discussing about cybersecurity, and especially how we can improve the quality of educations. We are discussing what's your view. I have more interesting view from our audience. I will ask later to Professor Rob.
Like I said, cybersecurity is always an important issue. I know that it's come up in everything from world politics to national and international politics here. I know that sometimes people are concerned about what is revealed and how it is revealed and all of that. So I do know that that whole cybersecurity is a very important issue. It is one that has even come up, and I'm sure it's even come up in Rob's family as well. But I can tell you that I've had family members and friends that have definitely had security issues with some of their information provided, whether that was banking information, whether that was personal data, or whether that was whatever. And I can tell you that it can be very disruptive because I know that in some of my friends and even family members' cases, it might have taken at least a month or two. And in some cases, they're still trying to clear them up and all of that because it can definitely impact and disrupt our lives in a lot of ways. And so I do know that as we continue to expand and become even more of a global community, and we're glad to be part of a greater global community, we do want to make sure that we protect ourselves and our information as much as possible because it seems like some of these tools that are out there are coming from places that might not be as secure as we would like. I've heard about people talking about some of the data that is being mined from places like China, like Russia, and like some of the supposed countries that are not our allies, but even some of our own allies may be getting information that we don't necessarily want them to have. And, we are oftentimes duped into sending information because they'll send you a nice little letter saying, if your Norton needs updating, and will you send us your email and some of the other information that you do not want to provide them. And if you're not careful, you can slip up and provide that information and then have the consequences of that as well. And I'm sure that even though Rob is a super smart guy and all of that, he has not been duped into those kind of circumstances. But I'm sure that, like me, he's got friends and family members that have been hustled that way because there's a lot of criminal types out there that are oftentimes trying to find a way to get at your money. Unfortunately, Robert, they're trying to get at my money. The money is low at the moment, so they might not be getting at all that much and everything. But maybe they're gonna try to get some of that Donald Trump like money because he still got a lot, even though he's got some criminal aspects that maybe he won't have that much either in the not too distant future. But right now, the wallet's on the low period. It's not payday or anything of that nature. So if they're trying to rob, it's going to be kind of hard. What's that old saying about getting blood from a turnip? It's kind of hard to do it if there's nothing there and there's no blood in a turnip. So I know the saying that I am mentioning you are familiar with because you're one of those people that knows about those kinds of things. But what do you think, Rob?
Well, I think the interesting part of this that I'm going to take this orthogonally from is making this stuff topical. So Mark pointed out President Trump, and President Trump just got caught with a rather large amount of confidential information that was supposed to be returned. That opened up a series of discussions online between me and a bunch of people that I both used to work with and people I've met on social media with regard to how poorly people are trained to understand security classifications. And if you go to work for a larger firm, you're going to find out that there are levels of security classifications. They're secret, typically something equivalent to secret, top secret, and then compartmentalized. And the wording may be different, but it amazes me how few people are trained into how to handle the different security levels and what to do about it. In fact, even in some of the older firms, so the skills seem to be waning a bit. When I first started off in IBM, security was part of the culture, and so we were trained whenever you were in a public area, you didn't talk about business. The only people that could talk to media were the people who were designated to talk to media. Anybody else was not allowed to do that. And each of the security classifications was auditable. And you could be punished if you either underclassified or overclassified a document. Because overclassification resulted in higher cost and reduced productivity. Lower classification resulted in an intellectual property exposure. And so it was critical that people really understood that deeply. Now, what makes it interesting with regard to the US president, Donald Trump, is that Donald Trump aggressively when he was campaigning for president, said that he was going to enforce and strengthen the intellectual property laws in the United States, and he did so. He turned what had been a misdemeanor in terms of mishandling confidential information into a felony, and increased substantially the penalties associated with doing so, and then turned around and did it himself with regard to how he was just caught with this information in his house, once again showcasing that he certainly could talk about security, but he had no fundamental understanding of what the hell it was he was talking about. And not for those of us that known the guy for a while, that's not a huge surprise. But in the end, by not understanding the very thing he was getting everybody upset about, he put himself at what is likely now criminal risk. Anybody else that wasn't in politics, by the way, that had done this would be under felony prosecution right now. We had even before Donald Trump passed this into law, we had an NSA guy, a contractor that was taking confidential information home. He wasn't giving it to anybody. He was kind of a hoarder. He'd take it home and he'd just leave it at home. And it was stuff he was supposed to have access to. He just wasn't supposed to take it home. And he's in prison now. So he never sold it to anybody. Never passed it on. But just removing it from the site was enough to get him in trouble. And when I was doing security audits as part of IBM, we had a CEO that would go around telling all the other executives how, since he was a career IBMer and we were an acquisition, how stupid we were with regard to security and how much smarter he was with regard to security. And I was the guy that got to audit him. Let's just say it didn't go well. So the end result is having a fundamental understanding of how security works in the company you're in, both physical and electronic, can go a long way to protecting your career at any level in the company that you might aspire to from what might be a catastrophic outcome. In my tenure, there were a number of C-level executives that were ex-C-level executives because they didn't really learn that underlying lesson of security. And in most firms, screwing up the security is not something where you get a warning and a pass. You screw up on security, somebody walks you out the door, and good luck with your career after that. So it is really important that everybody going into industry, particularly larger companies, understands the security rules and regulations and adheres to them, because the risk you take by not understanding them is career level.
But Rob and Dr. Sharif, along those same lines, I've got a friend of mine, I believe that they're in the capital of California, I believe that's Sacramento, if I remember correctly, and everything. But they are and they have their reasons for being this. They are an anti-vaccine person and all of that, and have been that during the entire time that we've been in the middle of this pandemic. And a part of it is because of losing a family member, and of course that kind of color in their view about the impact of the vaccine and all along those lines. But I do know in conversations with them, and we don't talk as much as we used to, but we still stay in touch and all of that, that they are oftentimes concerned about going into the office because they're afraid that the office will force them to do something that they don't want to do. So in that case, it's almost a security matter for them as well, because like I said, they almost refuse to go into the office because they're afraid that if they go to the office can trick them into getting something that they don't want to get. And like I said, I've got my vaccine. Need to get the boosters at some point. I've been a little bit lazy on that, but definitely just thinking about the security issues of those that might be having a different attitude than the marching orders of the government and some of the agencies out there, because that's another corporate thing that I know folks have been having conversations with in terms of security.
Well, so it's never a good situation where you've got employees and the employer at cross purposes. If the employees are convinced that the employer is going to do something bad to them, they will typically either quit or organize. Right. And clearly, if you're one of those employees that doesn't trust your employer, you probably should be working for somebody else. Whether or not the employer is going to do you harm or not, it creates a toxic environment, and the toxic environments are not good for the employer, and they're not good for the employee, and eventually the employer will largely terminate you. If you're disobeying orders and directives, particularly when it comes to health and safety, that you're going to get fired. And here in the States, and my most experience is in California, where OSHA is very strong. If you're violating OSHA regs, the company get rid of you just because of the liability that you would represent. But as a matter of practice, if you don't trust the company you're working for, get another job. I mean, because the company is going to figure it out, and if you don't make the choice, they'll make it for you, and you're going to be a hell of a lot less employable if they terminate you for cause than if you just quit and go find another job. So particularly because if you're doing it on your own, a good chance you might find the other job before you have to quit your existing one. And it's always better to be in a job if you're looking for one than to be unemployed or looking one. One, you can kind of take your time and you're not as panicked. Right. But number two, the new employer is not wondering why the hell you're unemployed. So you're more marketable employed. And you're also less stressed out if you're employed. But if you're working for somebody you don't trust, but for whatever reason, work for somebody else.
And one of our guests brought up something earlier. I mean, one of the people that was making comments and everything, and I saw that earlier, they were talking about how enforceable it is with what's going on in the world when some of these cybersecurity risks are taking places in other parts of the world. So I know that they were talking about it being a global law enforcement issue, and I agree with them that if someone gets, it was actually Jason, who I know has been on shows with me before, that if someone gets scammed in Kansas or gets scammed somewhere else, how are they going to actually enforce that if the person is in Indonesia or wherever the person may be?
Yeah, and I addressed this earlier, but the issue is really without some type of stronger global law enforcement. We've got the international court, and we've got an information sharing entity out there, but we don't have international enforcement, and that really hampers our ability to go after the criminals, and that does mean that you just have to be a lot more careful. The first defense is always the best defense. If you're not hacked, if you're not compromised, if you're not stolen from in the first place, then you don't have an issue. And here your recourse is limited. And we even had police departments that were getting hit by ransomware, and a police department can't mitigate the problem. You're sure as hell not. And we've had issues where the U.S. Department of Defense has been hit. Once again, if they've got resources that you and I couldn't even dream of having, and if they can't deal with it, there's no chance we are. So the best defense here is being informed, being warned. I mean, I just got an attempt to hack me today. I got a notice. It looked like it came from Best Buy, saying that my Geek Squad account was going to get renewed for $569 for something that I didn't have, and all I had to do was log into my account and say I didn't want it, and I looked at this. Well, first off the bat, they were emailing my wrong email address. Number two, they didn't really know what product it was that had the warranty on, so that clearly wasn't right. And often they're just little things you can pick out that if you had an account with them, they should know. They shouldn't have to ask you that. They should never have to ask you for your ID and password, because their system knows that their individuals aren't supposed to know it. And so anytime somebody's either asking you for money on a gift card, whether it's government or somebody else, asking you for your ID or password, asking you any challenge questions. What was your first car? What was the first city you lived in? What was your mother's maiden name? Those should all be really big red flags that, okay, something else is going on here, and that person is trying to get access to my credentials and probably get access to my bank account or do me harm. And of course, we've got other issues going on that you have to be aware of as well. Swatting is now on the upswing again in the gaming community here. And swatting is when somebody calls into the police department pretending there's somebody else and tells the police department that you're going to blow up a government office, that you've got somebody you're holding hostage, that you're going to commit suicide, and suddenly you've got a whole bunch of police officers showing up at your door, and they're kind of pissed. We've had several people get shot as a result of this. And so being aware of that risk, there's really nothing much because it's all happening outside. All you've got to recognize is there's a chance that a bunch of police officers may show up at your door armed, and your best defense is just to capitulate and just be as harmless as you possibly can be. You go running outside with a gun, you're going to get shot, because they're going to think you're a terrorist, and you need the time to work that stuff out. But so there are a number of threats out there, particularly here in the U.S. There are a number of threats that people probably should be better trained to deal with, because we haven't been really great at mitigating them at the government level.
So wait a minute, Rob, you mean to tell me, and Dr. Sharif as well, that if I see a picture, and I'm looking at this young lady's profile picture and everything, that looks like Francesca, but if I talk them into calling me and they sound like Bob from Nigeria, that I shouldn't be giving them the information, because they're probably trying to catfish me and everything? Because like I said, Francesca.
Yeah, catfishing is a whole different scam level where you go after some mostly lonely old guy like we are, and convince them that you're some hot babe that just fell in love with our picture, and all we got to do is pay off their car, and they'll just come and drool all over us. Yeah, that idea. I mean, you kind of just stopped me. Of what young 21-year-old girl is just dying to meet some 60 or 70-year-old guy? To just be a kind of a big warning that this probably is a huge scam. And chances are that 21-year-old girl is probably a 33-year-old guy living in his mother's basement. So the whole catfishing thing, that really comes down to being gullible.
Right.
And recognizing that if something sounds too good to be true, there's a really good chance it's too good to be true. So yeah, watch out for those. Facebook is full of that stuff. I'll go up there and I've been reporting them on a regular basis. But you go in and you'll see a piece of equipment for sale for $25, and damn thing's like $1,000 or $1,500 on the market. Yeah, they just want your money. There is nothing that's going to be coming for you if you send them the money.
And the catfishers are very bold. I remember one person that was talking to me that was in that space, and they claimed to be in the construction space. And so they sent me a picture of the equipment that they wanted and all of that, because sometimes as a journalist, I'm very much curious as to what their game is and all of that. And it was like some multiple thousand. It might have been a $10,000 piece of equipment. And I'm going like, no, you're not going to get that shipped to you in Romania or wherever they were supposed to be at and all of that. But they were very bold in what they wanted to try to purchase for them. So there are some very bold people out there in that gullible space.
Yeah, and to keep yourself safe, as long as you're buying through a service that has recourse, use a credit card, you've got recourse. eBay, you've got recourse through eBay. PayPal, you've got recourse through PayPal, as long as you use the retail side of PayPal and you just don't send them cash, so you don't get the insurance. So recognizing what the threats are out there and the ways that you have to mitigate them are also important. When sending money, you don't send cash, you don't send money orders. I'd probably avoid checks. PayPal works as long as you use the commerce side, and credit cards work because you can cancel the charge.
Cash App
ATM cards, no.
How do you feel about Cash App and Zelle? Because I've heard both of those being as well. So from a security space, how do you feel about those two? Because I do know some people in the sports gambling space that have used Zelle, and I definitely know some people on all kinds of businesses that have used Cash App. So from a security standpoint, how do you feel about those two?
I've never used them myself. That really depends on what their recourse is for fraud. So if you know what to do if you're defrauded through them, if they provide the same kind of recourse that a credit card company does, where you can challenge the charge and they'll reverse the charge for you, then it makes sense to use them. If they don't, I don't know what their backing is. If they don't, then you're still screwed. That's the kind of the difference between an ATM card and a credit card. With an ATM card, the money's gone. With a credit card, since you're really playing with the bank's money, it's effectively not gone, and you can get it back. So it's always better to use a credit card over an ATM card to be doing a transaction. But those other cash services, it really depends on whether their mitigating factors are in line with what, say, PayPal's are. And if they are, they're probably fine. If they're not, then I probably would avoid them. Gambling is one of those areas that is kind of iffy to begin with. So depending on the local laws surrounding the underlying effort. So if the laws in your state or country allow for online gambling, you may have some recourse. If they don't allow for online gambling, then simply reporting the activity may get you into trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know where Sharif went, but I do like recourses when recourses are there, because I am one of those people that unfortunately need to lose a little weight and get some exercise going on. So that means that I sometimes am doing that whole DoorDash thing. Have so occasionally done Grubhub, I believe, but definitely DoorDash on a regular basis. And one of the things I love about those services is that if the food gets lost or if you don't get the food that you want, there is the recourse to actually send it, well, not so much send it back, but to have the money reimbursed to you so that you can order from another one later on. And so definitely any of those services, whether it's food or banking, if you can get the money back, I am all about that. So that's one of the things I love about DoorDash is that if my driver gets lost and the food gets shipped somewhere else in the apartment complex, I can send them a nice little note saying, hey, I didn't get my food. Could y'all please reimburse that money so that I can come back and get it later on?
Right. Well, we probably should be wrapping this up so we can get Sharif back into bed. Sharif's got COVID, we need to keep him healthy, and probably need to wrap. But so overall, in terms of cybersecurity, the everybody should be at least basically aware of the threats that are out there, how you can be phished, particularly how you can be catfished if you're an older white guy, and the red triggers in terms of whether you're going to be compromised. If people are asking you for challenge questions, password ID, if you get something in where the entity is asking you questions about stuff that they already should know, those are all really big red flags. And particularly if you didn't initiate the engagement and they initiated the engagement, that's a red flag. A really quick practice is, when in doubt, don't click on the links, don't use the phone number in the email, look up the phone number, look up the email address, and contact the company through those methods that you know are secure. Do not use any of the information in an email to contact or contact or interact with a company. And then with regard to underlying education with cybersecurity, the closer connection you have with industry throughout the education process, the better the overall outcome. And that's the thing that's been, I think, long-term lacking in terms of connecting industry and education overall.
Rob, I know we're wrapping up, and I definitely agree. I know Sharif's got to go get to his bed and get some rest, but aren't there certain industries that you should almost know from Jump Street are not going to be reaching out to you? Because I'm thinking that things like the electric company and certain other ones, if you're getting a letter or a phone call from them, you should already be automatically suspicious because they are probably not going to be doing that kind of marketing to you.
Well, that's kind of depending on what it is. So if you get a letter from the power company that says you haven't paid your bill and we're going to shut you off, it probably makes sense to pick up the phone and call the power company and make sure that they're not going to do that. It's because that does happen, and people do make mistakes and checks do get lost. But here it should raise a flag. If you've never received a contact like that before, chances are it's fraudulent. And so you approach it that way, but you don't ignore it, because the worst thing you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have your power shut off. But don't operate from inside the email construct. Call them using the number you find off the web, or contact them through an email that you found off the web, not from inside the email or the text or whatever it is you've got. Right. And just remember, if whatever it is, if it sounds too good to be true, for instance, if my father-in-law fell for this one, if he was told he won a lottery in Canada that he'd never entered into, and he sent the guys, I think, $20,000 in tax money to get his Cadillac and his $1 million, and of course never saw that $20,000 again. So if you didn't enter a contest, pretty good chance you didn't win it. So again, if it looks too good to be true, it isn't. Somebody in Nigeria isn't looking for you to spread their wealth to the world. Bill Gates isn't going to send you a ton of money because you're just a nice person. That stuff just doesn't happen. And so there's just an entire category of things that you can laugh when you get it, but you shouldn't fall for it because it's simply too good to be true.
Mm-hmm. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
And get better, Sharif.
Yeah, get better.